Hello and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell. In this podcast series, I speak with media and industry colleagues about the biggest stories in aviation. Today, I'm joined by Irina Tsukerman, who is a cybersecurity expert and commentator, and we're going to be talking about reports that have come out of Jerusalem that the Israeli flag carrier El Al Airlines has been suffering from cybersecurity attacks mid-flight. So, Irina, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you. And so let's start off with kind of a brief overview of what's happened. What do we know so far about what El Al has said or reported as cybersecurity attacks when, they've got their flights midair and, their passengers are with them?
So essentially, two flights in the course of the past week were flying out of Thailand, Israel bound. They were flying over Somalia territory, which has been suffering from assorted cyber incidents internally. And there were reports of two attempted hijackings of the communication systems in flights, which would have redirected the El Al planes towards dangerous areas. So they were part of the area they were flying over was the Red Sea, which has reported attacks from the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen. According to the reports, the pilots were trained to deal with such incidents, so they disregarded the instructions during these disruptive attacks and instead switched to alternative communications, and they checked for instructions and for the general reports from other points of contact, and proceeded smoothly to their destination.
And in terms of, so you say it happened over the Red Sea. I mean, do we know who's claimed responsibility for these cyber attacks so far, or is it unknown?
Officially, no group has claimed responsibility. Jerusalem Post cites unknown sources from Somalia, claiming that the alleged responsible parties were located in Somaliland, which is a breakaway autonomous region that is considered part of Somalia, but is essentially self-governing. However, it is highly unlikely for technical reasons that groups there would have either intent or such capabilities.
And in terms of, severity, I mean, how severe were these incidents? How serious were they, from a security perspective for the airline? Because El Al, it has a reputation for being very, very, taking a very serious approach to its security. And obviously, a cyber attack is something that is potentially going to be quite a danger to obviously the pilots, the passengers, and potentially, people on the ground as well.
Well, interestingly enough, according to Jerusalem Post, El Al staffers did describe this incident as not being a security incident, and the fact that they were able to have the alternative communications to switch to quickly, and B, they reacted very promptly is very good in terms of their reaction time. The fact, however, that hackers were able to enter the systems and twice within the week kind of contradicts the description that El Al was not being specifically targeted, especially since we have not heard major reports from other airlines along the same line. So it seems to be pointing in the opposite direction, that El Al was at least one of the airlines being targeted, and certainly it was being targeted independently.
El Al have, they've said that, look, the disturbances were not aimed at their own planes. And this, as you say, they say that it's, not a security incident. But is that potentially, the airline downplaying the severity because they don't want to alarm passengers? Because, if they did say that, look, this was, a great cause of concern, it's causing alarm bells within the airline, I mean, passengers won't want to fly. So, I mean, can we be reliant on those reports from the airline themselves that this wasn't a security incident, or, were they downplaying it at all?
I would be very skeptical of this, because to my knowledge, this is the first time that this successful effort to break into the communication systems on flight have been successful. Up until now, all the reports from airline industries regarding hacking attempts involved their websites or attacks while they were not in flight. The fact that this attempted hijacking took place during the course of the flight makes it certainly quite dangerous, even if it was not successful. And the fact that it was the same airline during the course of a single week also points to a potential pattern of activity aimed at this airline. And also, what other reasons would it be to give alternative instructions for flight to the airline that has a very unknown course if it does not involve some element of danger? If it's not the actual authorities giving those instructions, who would that be and why? It only points to a security related concern, and especially given the fact that there has been a pattern of hijackings and electronic jammings of vessels in the Red Sea. This seems to be an escalation, and it seems to me that the whoever is responsible is gaining acumen in attacking airline communication systems. And that, again, it's not just the first pattern over the Red Sea related security incidents, but the first patterns of any airlines so far.
So we still don't know who's claiming responsibility for these attacks. You kind of hinted there that we still don't know, what the motive might be. I mean, would you care to speculate on potentially whether this was an attempt to, severely harm these passengers, or whether the, attempt that it was, more an effort to cause alarm and distress without trying to, cause a potential, catastrophic fatality count?
At the very least, it was a test of the systems to see the response time and the response type of response by the airlines and the level of their preparations. In the future, we should not rule out a more aggressive form of electronic jamming that essentially forces the airline to redirect the flight to the nearest destination where they could land. And there, they could have terrorist groups or criminal groups awaiting and taking the plane and the passengers into custody. And this is exactly the sort of thing we have seen with the vessels. We see electronic jamming efforts that essentially forces them to redirect, and we also see physical access by individuals from other vessels in the area. Once those vessels are taken into custody, the crews are generally arrested as are the ships, and the ships can actually be sued by the country where the ships are taken to, and confiscated or taken up for ransom against the legitimate the countries where those ships are flagged. I assume something similar could happen to airlines, except there with the commercial airlines with a high number of passengers, we could have a pattern of ransom taking as well as political demands of the sort we have seen in the 70s, albeit with a more high-tech efforts instead of bombs or explosives or individuals boarding the plane, which has become more difficult since those days. We are seeing cyber efforts increasingly sophisticated. So far, I think they are testing the systems, but I think in the future, their capabilities may be able to essentially hijack the airplane without, by force, without the pilots being able to retake custody of the airplane.
So this is the second attack, as you say, that's happened to El Al aircraft specifically. I mean, what potential danger are future flights, future aircraft and passengers in terms of potentially, more attacks coming? And what do we know in terms of how, these attacks were diverted?
I think in terms of the airplanes, those are the first such efforts. But we have seen that the vessels that have been diverted have generally been hijacked towards Iran, where they were where the cargo, most of those ships were cargo vessels, has been taken off, and the crews have been removed and arrested, pending political resolution with the home countries. A lot of the times the crews are not from the same country as the ship is flagged. So these legal and political dimensions of resolving the issues with the cargo and resolving the issues with the vessels separate from the crew is resolved with several different countries. A lot of the times the dispute is described as tit for tat for the arrest of Iranian vessels circumventing international sanctions on oil deliveries to various countries. But some of the times they are also somewhat independent efforts, not linked to the Western countries that are generating those sanctions. In the case of El Al, I think there is a specific reason they're being likely targeted, just as initially the vessels in this round of vessel hijackings and attacks, they started with Israeli flagged vessels, but once those vessels started taking alternative routes again around Cape, around South Africa, they switched to broader attacks on other types of vessels that had nothing to do with Israel, either in origin or in any other links. And essentially now most ships, with the exception of Chinese and Russia flagged ships, are in danger of potential hijackings or attacks. So we could see the same pattern with El Al unless there's a very clear effort to figure out who exactly is perpetrating these attacks, and also strengthen the security systems of the communications to make it impossible for the hackers to take advantage of any vulnerabilities.
So let's look at the aviation industry specifically now. I mean, what are the implications of these incidents for Israel's aviation industry, and also kind of from obviously a cybersecurity perspective as well?
Well, I think the major takeaway from here is there's a very large vulnerability gap in the systems that is being exploited by hackers. Moreover, despite the previous incidents, the previous incident, it was not fixed in time specifically by that airline. And now different airlines may have slightly different types of communication systems. So different types of airlines may be more difficult to exploit, and maybe it's not as easy to try different airlines for these hackers, and maybe that's the reason they're attacking the same one, given that it happened so quickly within these incidents. Perhaps they were focusing on one because other systems of communications are different, and it takes time to figure out what those vulnerabilities are and exploit them. But I don't think any system is unhackable. I think all of them will have some sort of a way for hackers to get through, and therefore every airline is potentially in danger. We could see a wave of such attacks in the future, and not all airlines will be equally prepared to deal with them over time as voice cloning becomes more sophisticated, and as hackers potentially could gain access to valuable intelligence from the points of origin as well as points of destination. They could simulate the directions of the expected parties and make it more difficult to identify the fact that that the plane is actually being diverted until it is too late.
And in terms of the the potential implications also of these attacks for the ongoing conflict in between Gaza and Israel, I mean, what has there been any suggestion that these attacks are linked to that? Obviously, you touched on events happening in the Red Sea at the moment, but do we know anything about potentially why specifically El Al has been targeted over any other airline?
Well, in the case of vessels, that was very clearly stated by the Houthis as well as by Iran, and they claimed that once the United States and other Western countries withdrew their support for Gaza and enforced a ceasefire, these attacks would come to an end. And once again, they started by targeting Israeli planes, according to their statements, in an effort to force withdrawal from Gaza. However, there's nothing linking. We have seen such attacks previously against non-Israeli vessels by the Houthis and by Iran. Therefore, these claims seem to be merely a justification for a broader pattern of power projection by Iran and its proxies. In the case of Alal, interestingly, the groups have not identified themselves, most likely because this was most likely a test of their ability to enter the systems. They're withholding that information until they are ready for a real full-scale cyber attack. but I do believe this is not likely to be a coincidence, and given the area where it all happened, it is most likely linked to the capabilities of the same actors and the same intent. That said, it may be not so much. I doubt that they will use the same excuse that this is an effort to bring the conflict to an end. I think this is more of a clear either a ransom or political terrorism focused effort that may be that this excuse that they were using previously they no longer seem to be bothering with.
You suggested earlier on that this is an escalation potentially of events in the region at the moment. I mean, do we know anything about what government or aviation authorities are investigating at the moment? I mean, are Israeli security forces involved? I mean, how far does this go in terms of where governments and agencies are going to be investigating?
Well, it's if the attacks are being perpetrated by the same actors, they definitely constitute a serious escalation, not only because of the type, because they're now entering airspace and not just maritime security, but also because they're escalating against passenger commercial airlines and not simply cargo ships, where there is an expectation that hijacked vessels will not necessarily be harmed, that they're doing so to extract money and political concessions. Whenever you have civilians involved, it is always a much more serious escalation. I believe the Israel authorities will be looking at of course, to patch up the vulnerabilities as soon as possible, but also to identify the exact source of these attacks based on their location as much as possible. And as I said, it is very doubtful that Somaliland is the point of origin for these things. They do not have known capabilities of that type, nor a known grievance against Israel.
Well, look, Irina, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, for this morning for you, I know, on the Aviation Briefing podcast. I'm sure if this escalates, we might come back to you for some developments. But yeah, thank you very much again for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
This has been the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell.